Today on Freedom Alive, the proposed legislation that's the most extreme threat to religious freedom, free speech, privacy, and women's rights ever proposed by Congress. Welcome to Freedom Alive. Hi, I'm Steve Stiger. Imagine legislation that would tear down all existing gender protection in churches, schools, and hospitals. Simply put, the Equality Act would allow boys in girls' sports, boys in girls' locker rooms, boys in girls' bathrooms, and so much more. Stay tuned to learn about the far-reaching expansion of the federal government into every corner of our lives and the impact it would have on your family. Plus, my co-host Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel is here to tell us the latest that's going on in America in his Freedom Update.
The so-called Equality Act is the most extreme law ever to come from Congress. It's already gone through the House, and now it's in the Senate where we can stop it. What does this bill do? First of all, it expands the federal government into every corner of our lives. Everyone will be affected. It involves what is called LGBTQ, and the Senate version of this bill states that Q stands for queer. That is, in fact, the words of this bill. What does that encompass? It encompasses not only lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, but it encompasses the entire universe of sexual philias, including 550 such paraphilias. Which one of those is pedophilia? That's right, having sexual relations or desires toward children. And get this, it applies to every church and every religious school, pre-K through college, daycares. Every single area of our lives will be affected. So if a church, for example, has a problem allowing a pedophile to teach or be around children, and it takes an action to prevent that, that's a violation of the Equality Act. The consequences are catastrophic. The church could lose its tax-exempt status, colleges and schools the same, but also colleges and universities would lose their accreditation for violating the so-called Equality Act, and consequently students wouldn't be able to get student loans, and you wouldn't be able to go into many of the graduate schools from the undergraduate unaccredited schools. Moreover, this bill makes a federal right to abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. It is the most extreme threat to freedom, religious freedom, and it'll affect everyone. We're going to talk about it in more detail as this program continues.
Thanks, Matt. I am overwhelmed at the breadth and depth of this bill. So can you further dig into that for our viewers and explain why it's so far-reaching?
It is hard to conceptualize how far-reaching this bill is, but it really will affect everyone, and that's not an exaggeration. Let me begin with a few things. It applies not only to employment, but also places of public accommodation, but it's not limited to physical facilities or places. So it applies to someone who's at home selling on eBay some goods in their house. It applies to anything that's on your website, any program that you provide. So anything that you say with regards to LGBTQ, and we want to get into that, will be covered, and it'll be considered discriminatory. Think about it this way, Steve. What you cannot do regarding race legally, and certainly morally we wouldn't want to discriminate on the basis of race anyway, you will not be able to do regarding LGBTQ. Now, many of us understand what LGB and T stand for. L is lesbian, gay, bisexual, or gay is lesbian, gay, bisexual, and then the T can stand for a transvestite, somebody who wants to dress like a woman, for example, a man, or transgender or transsexual, somebody who wants to take hormones and go through amputation of healthy body organs to appear like a woman and be identified as a woman. But what does Q stand for? Q stands for somebody who doesn't know what category they fit in, questioning, or as the Senate bill specifically says, it stands for, and I'm using their words, queer. What does that mean? It is the entire universe of sexual paraphilias. We're not going to get into
550 designations.
Yes, it's unbelievable. We won't go into all of those because it's just unimaginable what it encompasses. But one of those that we all clearly know about is pedophilia, which some advocates of that, having sexual relations or desires toward young people, are trying to rename, and they call it minor attracted individuals. They actually include this under Q. So that means, Steve, churches will be covered, Christian schools from pre-K through college, including your daycare, will be covered. If you do any kind of event at your church, such as weddings or other events, you'll have to allow same-sex ceremonies. Staff will ultimately be under this. Think of it this way. Churches are not exempt from racial discrimination policies. If you were to have a segregated bathroom, one for somebody who's Caucasian and one for people that are African American, that would be discriminatory. Certainly we wouldn't do that biblically, but if you did that, it's also a violation of federal law. And what would happen? We know for a fact what happened to a college some years ago when they had a policy that prohibited dating among different races. And the federal government came in and revoked the college's tax-exempt status. We know that schools, in order to advertise for people to come there, even schools from kindergarten through high school, must have a non-discrimination policy on the basis of race. Otherwise, they won't be able to operate. So if you have a policy that says we're not going to allow the boys in the girls' restrooms, shower rooms, locker rooms, or the church says, I'm sorry to this man who wants to go into the women's restroom, this is the women's restroom, the men's is there. If you resist, if you don't comply, you'll lose your tax-exempt status for churches or any religious or nonprofit organization. And for colleges and universities, you'll lose your accreditation. And that's a death knell to colleges and universities. So it is incredibly broad. It includes anything that's on your website. Imagine that if you had racially discriminatory information that you're sending out through emails or on your website, that would be actionable. Now, if you say anything against LGBTQ, that marriage is the union of a man and a woman, that sex should only be among a married man and a woman, a female and a male, as married husband and wife, that would be considered discriminatory, and you would be a target of a lawsuit by the United States Department of Justice and by private lawsuits as well. And beyond that, it also covers abortion. It makes a federal right of abortion from conception until birth, all 9 months. Parents would not be able to know or consent about their daughter's abortion. Doctors and hospitals and pharmacists would not be able to refuse abortion-inducing drugs or surgery. And it goes on and on and on. The breadth of this is staggering.
Let's drill into the impact on girls and women specifically. Can you spend a minute on that?
Yeah, this particular bill modifies and amends lots of federal laws, not only employment and public accommodations, but laws that govern girls' sports, for example, Title IX and so forth. Lots of federal laws. It's a massive rewrite of federal laws and allows the government through this LGBTQ and abortion to come into every corner of our lives. So with regards to girls' sports, we know, for example, there's a number of situations where one of the top mixed martial arts females got into the ring with a male who said that he identified now as a female, and she was one of the top contenders in the entire country, this individual who was at the championship level, and she got hit by this male and cracked her skull. She said she had never been hit so hard in her life, and she would never go back into a ring again with somebody who was a male, pretending to be a female. Under this particular so-called Equality Act, it would require that across the board. Women have made an incredible amount of advances in sports. Your daughter is on a college volleyball team. And women have made incredible advances at all ages, including in professional sports, and they have worked so hard for it. and they've been able to excel
for decades.
For decades. Now, what we see happening in Connecticut, who are the top winners in track meets in Connecticut? It's boys competing in girls' track meet. Who's the top weightlifter in the country right now that broke a world record for women's weightlifting? It is a man competing in a women's weightlifting competition. We're seeing this all across the board. And how does this affect people, including your daughter? Some of these girls, for example, in high school, they're looking for scholarships to go into colleges, and they have to compete in various situations where if they're not in the very top, they're not going to get the scholarship. It's already happened, Steve. It's not hypothetical. In some states that have gone partially this way, where the girls are being edged out because the top 1, 2, 3rd finisher are men or boys, and the girls are down below the cut level, and they are missing out on scholarship opportunities. It's an incredible reversal of everything we have fought for and women have fought for equal rights and equal treatment.
Let's focus on churches. You spoke to it earlier. Talk to this from the pastor, the lens of a pastor. What would this mean to churches?
Most bills that have sort of LGBTQ have an exemption for churches and religious organizations. Even in federal law that exists with regards to employment has an exemption for churches. Let me give you a quick example. This particular law, the Equality Act, so-called, says that the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act does not apply as a claim or defense. In other words, you can't raise religious freedom as a claim or defense. It therefore applies to churches and religious organizations and colleges, and you can't raise religious freedom as a defense. This law, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, went into effect in 1993. It was passed unanimously in the U.S. House, 97-3 in the Senate, and signed into law by President Bill Clinton. It was supported by the ACLU, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, Liberty Council, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, liberal, and conservative, across the board, overwhelmingly in favor in 1993. This is the first time Congress has now said, we're not going to allow you to use that law. And how would it affect, for example, Hobby Lobby? Hobby Lobby went to the Supreme Court, and churches are in the same category. They objected, as did Little Sisters of the Poor and many others, to providing abortion-inducing drugs and devices to employees. That's contrary to their religious mission. Hobby Lobby objected. It went to the U.S. Supreme Court. They won that case, but they won it based on the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. Now, if you have the same thing, which you will with this law, applying abortion across the board, and you say, but I have a defense, Religious Freedom Restoration Act, this bill says, no, you don't. We're taking that away from you. That's how extreme it is. So every church will be affected, not only with regards to the provision of abortion, abortion-inducing drugs and devices, including medically surgical abortion as well as chemical abortions. You'll have to provide that. Your insurance companies will have to provide that. And if you don't, you'll be in violation. You'll lose your tax-exempt status, including your state property tax exempt status as well, any other state tax exemptions. All that's gone. Then you'll be subject to the Attorney General's lawsuit and private lawsuits. But here's the other thing, counseling. This bill says you cannot counsel anybody who is seeking to change or overcome unwanted same-sex attractions, behaviors, or gender confusion. Somebody comes to you as a counselor or a pastor, and they say, I'm struggling with these unwanted feelings, Steve, or behaviors or thoughts, and I need help to overcome it because it conflicts with my religious values. Under this bill, it's banned for all ages, not just minors. All ages, all ages. No one, whether you're a minor or whether you're an adult, you cannot get that kind of counseling. It will be illegal. And it applies to licensed and unlicensed individuals, not just people who are professional counselors, but you as a pastor, on your church staff. Somebody comes into your office and they seek that kind of counsel. You can counsel them on anything except for this issue of helping someone be freed from unwanted same-sex attractions, behavior, or gender confusion. You won't be able to do it without violating this law. And again, the violation consequences are catastrophic. If you have in your church your pre-K, or you're having your children a daycare or some kind of care during church, or you have Sunday school or teachers in various school levels. The Q in LGBTQ specifically is referring to what the Senate bill calls queer. And queer is not just lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transvestite or transgender. It includes 550 sexually deviated paraphilias, one of which is pedophilia. And I'm not exaggerating. I wish this was absurd. It is absurd. I wish this was an extreme exaggeration. It's not. It's reality. Mm-hmm. That's why I said it's the most extreme threat ever to come out of Congress, not to just religious freedom, but in every way. So in that situation, you would not be able to prevent somebody who is a pedophile from having interaction with your youth, your children, or teaching someone. Let me give you another example. One is one that we're actually working with. This person teaches kindergarten through 5th grade, or he's in a K through 5 school in Madison, Wisconsin. Born male, has been known to the young people as Mr. So-and-so. One day said, I'm going to tell them I've changed, and creates a video with the principal's blessing, sends it out to K through 5 children without the parents' knowledge. And the video says, I'm no longer Mr., I am Mix, MX. You need to call me Mix now, no longer Mr. I know you might mess up a few times, but you need to get used to it. Call me Mix. What's Mix? He explained to these kindergarten through 5th grade kids what it is. That he's neither male nor female, that he's both male and female, and sometimes neither. Imagine that for a 1st grader. This person is neither male nor female, but sometimes he's both, and we have to call this person Mix, and if they call the person other than Mix, they get punished. Now, that's in a public school, but now you have the same thing in your Christian schools or your Christian Sunday school, and you take an action and you say, oh no, you can't be teaching our children like that. That goes against our sincerely held religious beliefs. Guess what? It's a violation. Think of it this way. If you did that to somebody because of their skin color, it'd be racial discrimination. You wouldn't want to do that for biblical and moral reasons, but it'd be illegal if you did. Mm-hmm. Now, even though you have solid biblical reasons in God's word, you can't take that action because it would be discriminatory under the so-called Equality Act.
Mm-hmm. At home, I really pray that this information is helpful to you. Our pledge on Freedom Alive is no spin, no noise. These are amazing aspects of this bill that we're talking about. Matt, can you take me back to 1993 for a minute, to the act that was passed at that time? And you spoke about it, and you said it was unanimous in the House, and it was, I believe, 97-3 in the Senate. So when you cum those numbers, it was 547-3?
Yeah, you have 500, yeah, so you have 425 in the House, 100 in the Senate. So that's 525 people minus 3 people.
So 522-3.
Imagine that in today's climate.
And at this point, fast forward to today, this was passed by the House in 19. It was passed by the House on February 25th, right? So take us up to today. Yeah. What does that say about our, I mean, that's not even 30 years.
When you say 19, we're referring to 2019. In 2019, the House actually passed this Equality Act. But then when it went to the Senate, we were able to stop it. But we had to guard the floor of the Senate every minute of the day, all the way through the end of the 116th Congress. But now that the 117th Congress was sworn in January of 2021, the bill is back. And so the House has passed it again, although by much more narrow margins. And now it's over at the Senate. Now, the good news is that there's a bipartisan agreement to keep the filibuster rule in the Senate. What that involves is you need 60 votes in the Senate in order to vote on the underlying bill. But there are attempts to get around that by slipping this into some kind of bill that's already there, like the budget or something else. It only requires a majority vote. And then when essentially that vote is done, and many people have already left the Senate floor, to bring this up as a voice vote and just pass it and push it on to the American people. So we're working with members in the U.S. Senate that are opposed to the Equality Act because of its expansive nature, to guard the Senate floor every minute of the day. But it's not only just in the upcoming weeks, it's all the way through the entire 117th Congress that has to be done, so that if there's an attempt to pass it through this sneaky procedure, there's one person on the floor in the wee hours of the morning, whenever it might come up for such a procedure, to object. And one person objecting, Steve, will then require that it goes to the full vote, again, which requires the 60 votes for the filibuster before they get to the underlying bill. So it's very, very possible and likely for us to be able to stop this in the Senate. We must stop this bill because the impact is incredibly broad and dangerous. But we're going to have to be vigilant, and people are going to have to respond and get involved.
We'll talk about that later with many ways where you can get involved at home. Let's talk about the part that stunned me about this whole thing was the abortion implications.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that? It's like, why is that even in here if it's not intentional, insidious? I mean,
Well, the two big things that are in here, and you hear only one mostly talked about, is LGBTQ. We've already talked about the expansiveness of the Q portion of LGBT in this bill to include all the sexual paraphilias. But it comes in through the idea that you can't discriminate on the basis of sex. And then they have a particular section that says pregnancy, childbirth, or any related condition. And you can't discriminate. Now, what does that mean? So if an OBGYN is treating a woman for pregnancy, then the doctor, the healthcare providers, the hospitals, the pharmacist, they have to provide abortion-inducing drugs because you say, well, we're going to treat you to protect your baby, but now this person's wanting to make a decision to take the life of that baby. You can't say no as a medical provider, as a hospital, as a pharmacist. You can't object to say, I am not going to be able to give the abortion-inducing drugs because that's going to end a human life, and that's contrary to my religious beliefs. It applies to the hospital, to all the medical providers, to all the doctors, to all the clinics. It applies to the pharmacists, and there's no religious freedom objection that's allowed. So you can see the impact of this bill. It is to decimate religious freedom. It is to force not just acceptance, but embracing and promotion of anything related to the broad expanse of LGBTQ and abortion. What it does is it's worse than any Supreme Court decision ever since 1993. It's worse than the Roe versus Wade decision. Why? Because it applies from conception, fertilization, all the way until the baby takes its first breath outside of the womb.
Matt, thanks for that great explanation. Now let's talk about something even more practical. Safety and privacy, right? Girls in a locker room, girls in a bathroom, and the implications of this act and how that could play out. Can you speak to that?
Steve, this is a very concerning aspect of this particular bill. Again, this applies to churches and schools of all levels, and it allows boys and men to enter into the restrooms of women, their locker rooms, the shower rooms, to bunk with them, like if you have an overnight trip, even if you're taking youth in the church on a mission trip in the city someplace, or take them on a camping trip, and you have boys in one place and girls in another place. If a boy says, I want to be in with the girls, you can't segregate that person. You can't tell the person, no, you have to stay with the boys. You can't put them in a separate location. They have to be able to sleep with the girls, not near the girls, but if you have like 3 or 4 or 5 girls in a room or in a tent, you must allow this boy who now says, I'm a girl, I identify as a girl. If you don't, that will ultimately be discriminatory under this so-called Equality Act. Now, we have represented women who have been sexually assaulted. And we have one particular case where she was in the restroom, changing room at a gym, and a man comes in and watches her and stays there for a while. She becomes very uncomfortable. She complains to the management, and the management says, well, they have a right to be able to be there. And so they punish the woman by revoking her gym experience there because she was the complainer as opposed to the one that they should have taken an action on. So you're not going to be able to prevent boys or men from entering into these very private places, including showers where women are changing. And that'll be across the board, and that's for churches, colleges, schools, every location. So the privacy is going to be at risk, but their personal safety is going to be at risk, and especially for women who have been abused, sexually assaulted. It also applies to shelters, like for shelters for abuse of women who have been domestically battered or sexually assaulted. And a man comes there and says, I want to be in this shelter. The shelter will not be able to say no and be able to bunk right beside this woman who just got sexually assaulted by a man. Imagine how that will make this woman feel. That's how extreme this bill is.
You can't make this stuff up. I just want to emphasize to our viewers, we have to pray for the situation and our leadership, right? I mean, I don't know how else to say that.
We have to pray and we have to act.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, we must act and we must win. And everybody needs to get involved.
Matt, thank you. This is such a blessing to be able to provide this information to our viewers in their homes. If what you heard today about the Equality Act shocks you, please know that this is the dream of the radical extremist. It was passed by the House on February 25th and now sits with the Senate. It would undermine the very fabric of our society, crush biblical values, and eliminate free speech and personal choice in America. These infringements on our liberties and constitutional rights speak loudly. This is why citizens need to get involved and stand up to this tyranny. Well, that's it for today, but be sure to tune in next week. Every week on Freedom Alive, we'll alert you to new government overreaches and update you on existing battles. We'll tell you about the victories people of faith are winning and how you too can fight back and get involved to keep your freedom alive. Watch Freedom Alive every week, only on Good Life 45. Freedom Alive, created for this time, exclusively on Good Life 45. Freedom Alive, another Good Life 45 original production.